1 Kings chapter 7. In this chapter, King Solomon builds his palace and fills the temple with various things. Verse 1. It took Solomon 13 years, however, to complete the construction of his palace. He built the palace of the forest of Lebanon. It was 46 meters long, 23 meters wide, and 30 meters high, with 4 rows of cedar columns supporting trimmed cedar beams. It was roofed with cedar above the beams that rested on the columns, 45 beams, 15 in a row. Its windows were placed high in sets of 3 facing each other. All the doorways had rectangular frames. They were in the front part in sets of 3 facing each other. He made a colonnade that was 32 meters or 75 feet long and 13.5 meters or 45 feet wide. In front of it was a portico. In the front of that there were pillars and an overhanging roof. He built a throne room, called the Hall of Justice, where he was to judge the people, and he covered it with cedar from floor to ceiling. And the palace in which he would live was set further back, but was similar in design. Solomon also made a palace like the hall for Pharaoh's daughter whom he had married. All these structures from the outside to the great courtyard and from the foundation to the eaves were made of blocks of high-grade stone, cut to size and trimmed with a saw on the inner and outer faces. The foundations were laid with large stones of good quality, some measuring 15 feet and some measuring 12 feet, or 4.5 meters and 3.6 meters. Above these were high-grade stones cut to the specific size needed and cedar beams. The great courtyards were surrounded by a wall of 3 courses of dressed stone and 1 course of trimmed cedar beam. So was the inner courtyard of the temple of the Lord Yahweh with its portico. Okay, let's look at this. So one thing you can see is how long Solomon took to build the temple of God, which was 7 years, and how long he took to build his palace. Now, depending on how you look at it, there are 2 very different opinions on this. Some people believe that it's not a good comparison because Solomon took so much longer to build his palace, as in he took more time into it. Some people look at it as Solomon was so dedicated that he wanted the temple of the Lord to be built quickly, and he didn't care so much about his palace. So take that as you will. There are 2 opinions on that. However, one thing we can say about his palace is his palace was amazing, very much like the temple of the Lord. It had something very similar to it in that it was built from the bottom, like from the floor, all the way to the ceiling in cedar wood, or different types of wood, because it's called the Forest of Lebanon, which shows how much wood is being used. Remember, this is a place where wood of this size and this quality is very rare. You can also see from the size of this thing, I mean, it is 150 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. This is huge, which is also why he would need to use wood from Lebanon, because those were the only trees that would be able to span this gap. So the need for cedar wood, and this great quality cedar wood from the area of Lebanon, was so needed. Anyway, when it talks about the door frames, to us it seems a little strange that it would be so special to have rectangular door frames. One thing we need to understand is these door frames were probably ornate and carved. They're not just a simple little door frame. They were beautifully carved because, unlike the temple, Solomon's house didn't have the restrictions on what should be carved and how it should. He could carve it with anything. Anyway, continuing on, we see how high the colonnade is. You know, some of these are exceptionally long and wide, porticos and stuff like this. We have the throne room, which is called the Hall of Justice. So from the very beginning, he has planned to have this large courtroom, which would make sense because he needs to hold court and judge people in it. And then we see that he builds himself a palace that's set off from the main court area, where he's holding and he's going to judge cases and stuff. And he set aside his own palace. Not only does he do this, he builds a palace for Pharaoh's daughter, which definitely shows her position among his wives. We're going to see he has many wives and concubines, but Pharaoh's daughter is definitely a key wife, a very important one, which makes sense, seeing that Egypt is the most powerful nation around at this time. We continue on. One thing I do want you to notice is, we're talking about these huge pieces of stone. I mean, these are 4.5 meters, or about 15 feet. So these are 15-foot square stones. These are massive. And the other one is 12 foot by 12 foot by 12. These are huge stones. Okay, and these are cut with something, he says, like, leveled kind of with a saw. Now, unfortunately, the word saw here is just our best guess because we don't actually know what this tool looked like. It's just called a saw because that's what people guessed it was. But whatever it is a tool that has been used to make things smooth and to cut it in the very precise dimensions. And these are huge stones that Solomon is bringing in to build his palace with. And then, just like with the temple, in many places, these are all covered with wood. So he's making this great and grand temple. Verse 13. So in the previous section, we talked about his temple, or his place that he's staying that's like the temple. And now we're going to move on to how Solomon filled the temple of the Lord Yahweh. Verse 13. King Solomon sent to Tyre and brought Huram, whose mother was a widow from the tribe of Naphtali, and whose father was a man of Tyre, and a craftsman in bronze. Huram was highly skilled and experienced in all kinds of bronze work. He came to King Solomon and did all the work that was assigned him. He cast 2 massive bronze pillars, each which was 27 feet high, 8.1 meters, and 18 feet around, about 5.5 meters. By line, he also made 2 capitals of bronze to set on top of the pillar. Each capital itself was 2.3 meters, or 7.5 feet high. A network of interwoven chains festooned the capitals at the top of the pillars, 7 on each capital. He made pomegranates in 2 rows, encircling each network to decorate the capitals on top of the pillar. He did the same for every single pillar. The capitals on top of the pillars in the portico were in the shape of lilies, which were 1.8 meters, or about 6 feet high. On the capitals of both pillars, above the bowl-shaped part, next to the network, were 200 pomegranates in a row all around. He erected the pillars at the portico of the temple. The pillar of the south he named Jachin, which roughly means he establishes. And the one on the north, Boaz, which means roughly in his strength. The capitals on top were in the shape of lilies, and so the work on the pillars was completed. Okay, so here we are introduced to a new person. Huram. Huram is a specialist in bronze casting. He is also has Jewish ancestry from his mother's side. Interestingly, that leads to some discussions on whether he should have been allowed to build this. And later on, there were some other discussions that said yes, because it was on his mother's side, he was born to a Jewish/Hebrew mother, so it is okay. Anyway, that's beside the point for this story. But we see here he's a specialist. His father obviously taught him his bronze working. And we can see what he does. And he creates these massive bronze pillars that are going to be in front of the temple. And there's 2 of them, main ones. And these are huge, 27 feet tall and 15 feet, or 15 to 18 feet around. Massive. And we're later on going to hear a little bit about how it was done. But we have these, and then the decorations on this are just insane. The amount of decorations, and just think about this, the weight these would be, because the decorations would have to be pretty solid. The pillars themselves, some argue that they were solid, some argue that they were hollow in the middle. But either way, these are very large pieces. Okay, So after he puts up these pillars, he continues on with the sea of bronze. 23. He then made the sea of cast metal, circular in shape, measuring 4.5 meter from rim to rim, or 15 feet in diameter, and 2.3 meters high, or 7.5 feet tall. It took a line of 13.5 meters, or 45 feet, to measure around it, the circumference. Below the rim, gourds were encircled it, 10 to a cubit. The gourds were cast in 2 rows in one piece with the sea. The sea itself stood on 12 bulls, 3 facing north, 3 facing west, 3 facing south, and 3 facing east. The sea rested on top of them, and their hindquarters were towards the center. It was a handbreadth in thickness, and its rim was like the rim of a cup, like a lily blossom. It held 44,000 liters, or about 11,500 gallons. Okay, let's stop here for a sec. This thing is huge. Okay, if you think of the average water drum in a house, the average water drum in here is about 100 liters, the large ones. The smaller ones, 20 to 40 liters, depending on what you're looking at, some even 10. Okay, but the larger drums are close to 100 liters, the drums used to store water. Okay, and if you're in other parts of the world, you have the 100-gallon drums. Okay, so you need 440 of those 100-gallon drums, or if we're talking, 115 of those 100-gallon drums, or 440 of the 100-liter things to fill this. This is massive. But there is a reason why. It is the water reservoir for the entire temple. This is probably where most of the temple water is coming from. We'll hear in later chapters how that gets filled, but there's a huge amount of water being stored in this, and you can actually see that it's a couple pieces. The basin part, which we've already talked about, the basin part itself is 15 feet from side to side, or 45 feet around, okay, and it's about 7.5 feet tall. And it's wide enough that's about a hand's breadth, which is about 8 centimeters or 3.5 inches wide, like just the metal sides. Each metal side is that wide. Okay, this thing weighs tons because it can carry that. And it needs to be that solid because it's carrying so much water. Okay, and it's also, they're purposely trying to make it grand. Now, that entire thing is cast in one piece, including the carving along the lip. And I'll talk about the casting process in a minute, but this is very difficult work. Now, he also has made a stand for it, and the stand you'll see is 12 bulls. Probably has some connection with the 12 tribes. Very often that's what the number 12 is going to connect to, but it doesn't have to be necessarily that. The bulls, usually the bull is associated with strength, so that could be a connection as well. Whatever it is, these are massive bronze things that are powerful enough, and they're probably made from solid bronze, because they would have to carry the weight of, 44,000 liters or 44,000 liters or 11,500 gallons. Okay, so this is something that's made huge. The bulls were probably made separately because they're not specifically stated it was the same piece, but the basin that holds all the water was definitely a one-piece cast, because the technology back then would probably not have been good enough to be able to do it in multiple pieces and join the pieces, so it had to be cast as one piece. Okay, moving on. He also made 12 movable stands of bronze, each which was about 6 feet long and 1.5 feet wide and 4.5 feet high. This is how the stands were made. They had sides attached to the uprights. On the panels between the uprights were lions, bulls, and cherubim, and on the uprights as well. Above and below the lions and bulls were wreaths of hammered work. Each stand had 4 bronze wheels with bronze axles, and each had a basin resting on the 4 supports, cast with wreaths on each side. On the inside of the stand, there was an opening that had a small circular frame that was about 1.5 feet deep. This opening was round, and with the basework it measured 2.5 feet. Around its opening there were engravings. The panels on the sides were square and not round, and the 4 wheels were under the panel. The axles to the wheels were attached to the stand. The diameter of each wheel was about 2.25 feet. The wheels were made like chariot wheels. The axles, rims, spokes, and hubs were all of cast metal. Each stand had 4 handles, one on each corner, projecting from the stand. At the top of the stand there was a circular band about 3.5 feet deep, or 2.2 meters, or 2 meters. The support and panels were attached to the top of the stand. He engraved cherubim, lions, and palm trees on the surfaces of the supports and on the panels in every available space, and wreaths all around. This was the way he made the 10 stands. They were all cast in the same mold and were identical in shape and size. Okay, so basically what he's done is he's made 10 conveyor belt system, right? One after the other, all exactly the same. 10 places that are smaller. Now these are still quite large because we're talking, 6 feet long and 6 feet long, 6 feet wide, and 3 feet high. So it's 6 by 6 at 3 feet. So this thing is quite large, 6 by 6 by, that's the diameter of this. This is a large piece of bronze. It's going to be ridiculously heavy, but it can be moved around as needed because it has the wheels on there. So intricately made, beautifully carved, and it is hammered bronze as well, so you can do more with it. And each one, as I said, is exactly the same. Now, he made the 10 bronze, verse 38, he made the 10 bronze basin, and each one held 880 liters, or 230 gallons, and measured about 6 feet across. One basin to go on each of the 10 stands. He placed the 10 stands on the south side of the temple, and of the 10 stands, 5 were placed on the south side of the temple and 5 on the north. He placed the sea on the south side, at the southeast corner of the temple. He also made the basins and shovels and sprinkling bowls. So Huram finished all the work he had undertaken for King Solomon in the temple of the Lord Yahweh. And this is the list. 2 bronze pillars, 2 bronze bowls, shaped capitals to fit on top of the pillars, 2 sets of networking decorating the 2 bronze-shaped capitals on top of the pillars made of bronze, and 400 pomegranates of bronze for the 2 sets of the network, 2 rows of pomegranate for each network, decorating the bowl-shaped capitals on top of the pillars, 10 stands made of bronze with 10 bronze basins, the sea of bronze, and the 12 bronze eye bowls underneath it, the pot, shovel, and sprinkling bowls as well. All these objects that Huram made for the King Solomon, for the temple of the Lord Yahweh, were from burnished bronze. The king had them cast in clay molds in the plain of the Jordan between Succoth and Zareth. Solomon left all these things unweighed, because there were so many, the weight of the bronze could not be determined. Okay, so here we have this list. We can see how much water these bowls are carrying. The stands were made, and then the bowls were made. And then we have this list of all the things, including an unnumbered amount of pots, shovels, and sprinkling bowls. Okay, and we can tell that these are unnumbered, and Solomon doesn't really care because he has just used so much bronze that there's no counting how much he's used. Now, the one interesting thing you'll see here is the bronze is all polished, all burnished bronze. But the interesting thing you'll see is where this was done. Now, the temple is in Jerusalem, but all the casting and the way they would have cast would have either been using the lost wax method to make a wax model of something. You put it in clay and then you melt the wax out so that the mold is perfect. Or it could also be just the wax, the clay itself was molded to the right shape, and then you pour the wax in. You pour the bronze inside. Okay, either method could have been used, but The interesting thing here to note is how far away this is from Jerusalem. This is on the other side of the Jordan. Okay, so you have to cross the Jordan Valley, the Jordan River, get to the other side, and it's further down south. So when you make all these things, obviously things like the bronze sea and the bulls and all that, they're going to weigh several tons. But this has to be transported all that way to Jerusalem. So that just blows my mind sometimes. Okay, continuing on. Solomon also made furnishings for the inside of the Lord's temple. He made a golden altar, the golden table on which the bread of the presence was placed, the lampstands of pure gold, 5 on the right side, 5 on the left, in front of the inner sanctuary, so 10 in all, the gold floral works and lamps and tongs, the pure gold basin, wick trimmers, sprinkling bowls, dishes and censers, and the gold sockets on the door for the innermost room, the most holy space, and also for the doors of the main hall of the temple. When all the work of King Solomon had been done for the temple of the Lord Yahweh was finished, he brought in the thing his father David had dedicated, for silver and gold and the furnishings, and he placed them all in the treasury of the Lord Yahweh's temple. So when we talk about all these things Solomon made, these are just the things that Solomon made. Solomon's father, King David, had been saving up his entire life and making instruments for the inside of the temple as well. And then Solomon brings all these, so he fully furnishes, gets everything, and then he brings all the things that his father has made and puts them in the treasury. So this temple is ridiculously wealthy. It has gold everywhere. And this is just a sign of the sheer wealth of King Solomon. And we'll stop here.